This is a story of two nations, Iran and Israel, whose destinies have been intertwined for millennia. A relationship that has journeyed from alliance and friendship to profound and dangerous animosity. To understand the present, we must travel back along this long and winding road. We begin not with declarations of war, but with the shared pulse of daily life in two vibrant modern capitals. Two cities separated by 1,000 miles of geography and politics, yet reflecting a common human spirit. Tehran, nestled against the Alborz Mountains, a metropolis teeming with history, culture, and resilience. And Tel Aviv, a beacon on the Mediterranean, alive with innovation, debate, and the energy of a nation constantly redefining itself. In the bustling markets of Tehran, generations connect, traditions are honored, and the future is debated over cups of tea. Along the boulevards of Tel Aviv, a mosaic of cultures converges, creating a society that is at once secular, religious, and relentlessly dynamic. Behind the headlines and the hardened rhetoric are millions of people whose lives are shaped by forces often beyond their control. This is their story, a story of shared ancestry, divergent paths, and the enduring question of whether conflict is inevitable or if another way is possible. In the grand tapestry of human history, few threads are as ancient, intricate, and deeply interwoven as those connecting the peoples of Iran and Israel. Their story is not one of constant animosity, but a long and complex saga of empires, exiles, and extraordinary moments of mutual respect and deliverance. It's a narrative that stretches back thousands of years, etched into clay cylinders and whispered through the halls of palaces, long before the modern conflicts that now define their relationship in the public eye. To understand the present, we must first journey back to the very beginning, to a time when these two ancient civilizations first crossed paths, shaping each other's destinies in ways that still resonate today. Our story begins in an age of empires, a world dominated by colossal powers that rose and fell like the tides of the great rivers that nourished them. The ancient Near East was a crucible of cultures, a landscape of constant conquest and upheaval. For the Jewish people, this era was marked by tragedy and displacement. In the 6th century BCE, the mighty Babylonian Empire, under its formidable king Nebuchadnezzar II, swept across the Levant. The kingdom of Judah was conquered, its capital, Jerusalem, was sacked, and its most sacred site, the First Temple, was utterly destroyed. This was not merely a military defeat, it was a spiritual cataclysm. The elite of Judean society, the scholars, priests, and artisans, were forcibly marched into exile, taken to the heart of their conqueror's domain, the magnificent sprawling city of Babylon. There, by the rivers of Babylon, they wept, remembering Zion. Their exile was a period of profound crisis, a test of faith and identity. They were a people unhomed, their link to their ancestral lands severed, their future uncertain. They held on to their traditions and their prophecies, praying for a deliverance that seemed impossibly distant. But empires, no matter how powerful, are not eternal. A new power was rising in the east, a force that would redraw the map of the world and change the course of history. From the highlands of Persia, a visionary leader emerged, Cyrus the Great. Founder of the Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus was a military genius, but his true legacy would be defined by his revolutionary approach to governance. In 539 BCE, his armies stood at the gates of Babylon. The city, once thought impregnable, fell with astonishing speed, not to a bloody siege, but through a strategic and largely peaceful takeover. The Babylonian Empire had crumbled, and a new Persian era had dawned. For the captive peoples within Babylon's walls, the arrival of this Persian king was a moment of both apprehension and hope. The proof of Cyrus's unprecedented vision is not found in the chronicles of vanquished enemies, but in his own words, inscribed on a small clay artifact, unearthed from the ruins of Babylon nearly 2.5 millennia later. This is the Cyrus cylinder. It is not a grand monument, but its message is monumental. Written in Akkadian cuneiform, the lingua franca of the time, it is a declaration made by Cyrus upon his conquest of the city. While such proclamations were common, the content of this one was anything but. Instead of boasting of slaughter and destruction, Cyrus presents himself as a liberator, chosen by Babylon's own god, Marduk, to restore order and justice. He denounces the tyranny of the previous Babylonian king and outlines a policy of radical tolerance. The cylinder records his decree to allow deported peoples to return to their homelands and to rebuild their ravaged sanctuaries. It speaks of repatriating cult statues to their shrines and establishing peace and freedom of worship throughout his new vast empire. This was not just a political strategy. It was a foundational principle of the Achaemenid state, a pioneering concept of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire held together not by fear, but by a degree of mutual respect. Though the cylinder does not mention the Jewish people by name, its policy is directly mirrored in the Hebrew Bible, in the books of Ezra and Isaiah, which hail Cyrus as a messianic figure, an agent of God's will. For the Jewish exiles in Babylon, this decree was nothing short of a miracle. It was the answer to their prayers, the end of their long captivity. Imagine the scene in Babylon. The news spreads through the city's quarters, from the grand avenues to the humble dwellings where the Judean exiles had lived for 2 generations. The Persian king, the new master of the world, had not come to impose a new bondage, but to offer freedom. He declared that the God of Israel was to be respected, that his temple in Jerusalem was to be rebuilt, and that his people were free to go home. The decree was a political masterstroke, ensuring the loyalty of a strategic region. But for the people it affected, it was a moment of profound, earth-shattering emotion. After decades of exile, the dream of return was now a reality. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus, not only permitted their return, but actively funded the reconstruction of their temple, returning the sacred vessels that had been plundered by Nebuchadnezzar. This act of state-sponsored restoration was unprecedented. It cemented a bond of gratitude and friendship between the Persian monarchy and the Jewish people that would endure for centuries. And so, they began the long journey home. Not all chose to leave the lives they had built in Persia, but thousands did, undertaking the arduous trek across the Fertile Crescent. This was the Second Exodus, a foundational event in the history of Judaism. They were no longer just the scattered remnants of a defeated kingdom. They were a community reborn, their identity forged in the crucible of exile and redeemed by an act of Persian grace. This return allowed for the compilation of the Hebrew Bible, the construction of the Second Temple, and the very continuation of Judaism as we know it. The benevolent shadow of Persia loomed large and protective over Judea for the next 200 years. This foundational story of liberation and return established a unique relationship. While other empires sought to suppress and assimilate the Jews, the Persians offered protection and autonomy. This positive memory became deeply embedded in Jewish consciousness. But this was not the only time a Persian monarch would play a pivotal role in the survival of the Jewish people. A century later, in the heart of the Persian Empire, in the winter capital of Susa, another crisis unfolded. The story is told in the biblical book of Esther. The Persian king, Ahasuerus, ruled over an empire stretching from India to Ethiopia. His powerful and paranoid vizier, Haman, incensed by the refusal of a Jewish courtier, Mordecai, to bow to him, devised a genocidal plot. He persuaded the king to issue a decree for the annihilation of all Jews, men, women, and children, across the 127 provinces of the empire on a single day. The fate of the Jewish people rested on the shoulders of one person, the king's new wife, Queen Esther. Unbeknownst to the court, Esther was herself Jewish, an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. To intervene meant revealing her identity and approaching the king unsummoned, an act punishable by death. Faced with an impossible choice, she made her decision, famously declaring, "If I perish, I perish." Through her courage, intelligence, and a series of carefully orchestrated banquets, Esther exposed Haman's wicked plot to the king. Enraged by the deception, Ahasuerus ordered Haman's execution, and unable to revoke his own royal edict, issued a second decree. This new order empowered the Jews to arm themselves and defend their lives against those who would attack them. On the appointed day, the intended victims turned the tables on their would-be executioners. The plot was foiled, and the Jewish people were saved. This deliverance is celebrated to this day in the Festival of Purim, a joyous holiday of feasting and remembrance. These two stories, the liberation by Cyrus and the salvation by Esther, are the cornerstones of the ancient relationship between Persians and Jews. They are tales of enlightened rule and heroic intervention, where Persian power was the instrument of Jewish survival. For over 2 millennia, these narratives fostered a sense of shared history and mutual affinity, a stark contrast to the persecution the Jewish people often faced elsewhere. This long, foundational period of friendship and respect is the essential, yet often forgotten, first act in the long road of our story. Before we continue, a note for viewers. The following chapter addresses sensitive historical events, including conflict and displacement, which some may find distressing. Our aim is to present these complex histories with balance and respect for all involved. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the world was redrawn. Empires crumbled, and new nations struggled to be born from the ashes. For the peoples of the Middle East, it was a period of profound and often painful transformation, setting the stage for a relationship that would swing from alliance to bitter animosity. In the halls of the newly formed United Nations, a decision was made that would irrevocably alter the region's destiny. In 1947, Resolution 181 proposed the partition of Mandatory Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. For one people, it was the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream. For another, it marked the beginning of a catastrophe. Two narratives, born from the same moment, began to run in parallel. For Jewish people, many of whom were survivors of the Holocaust, the creation of Israel was a return to their ancestral homeland, a sanctuary in a world that had offered none. They arrived by the thousands, seeking refuge and the promise of a new beginning. Simultaneously, for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, 1948 became known as the Nakba, or the catastrophe. The war that followed Israel's declaration of independence led to their mass displacement, creating a refugee crisis that remains unresolved to this day. These dual experiences of hope and loss, of homecoming and exile, became the foundational conflicting truths of the new Middle East. In this same period, another nation was charting its own course toward modernity: Iran. Under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran positioned itself as a key Western ally in the Cold War. Flush with oil wealth, the country embarked on an ambitious program of modernization and secularization known as the White Revolution. Tehran's streets buzzed with a new energy. Universities expanded, women entered the workforce in greater numbers, and a new urban middle class emerged. On the surface, Iran was a portrait of progress and a beacon of stability. And in this era, it found a surprising partner in the region: the nascent state of Israel. Sharing a strategic interest in containing the influence of pan-Arab nationalism, championed by figures like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, Iran and Israel forged a quiet but deep alliance. Iran became the second Muslim-majority country to recognize Israel de facto. They collaborated on military and intelligence matters, and Israeli architects and engineers helped build modern Iran. It was a pragmatic partnership, a friendship of peripheries against a perceived common threat at the center. But beneath the gleaming surface of the Shah's Iran, discontent was simmering. The rapid modernization often felt imposed from the top down, alienating traditional and religious segments of society. The Shah's autocratic rule and his feared secret police, the Savak, suppressed dissent with an iron fist. Wealth was concentrated in the hands of a select few, leaving many feeling left behind. By the late 1970s, this simmering resentment boiled over. A diverse coalition of students, intellectuals, merchants, and religious conservatives, united in their opposition to the Shah, took to the streets. Their movement found its voice and leader in the exiled Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In 1979, the unthinkable happened. The Shah, the so-called King of Kings, was overthrown. The Iranian Revolution sent shockwaves across the globe, replacing a 2,500-year-old monarchy with a new, radical form of government, an Islamic republic. The world and the Middle East would never be the same. The revolution didn't just change Iran, it shattered the regional order. One of its first acts was to sever all ties with Israel, which the new regime branded the Little Satan, an illegitimate occupier of Jerusalem and an outpost of the Great Satan, the United States. The Israeli embassy in Tehran was handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization. The era of quiet cooperation was over. An era of ideological confrontation had begun. The new Islamic Republic had a revolutionary mission: to export its ideology. Tehran began to cultivate a network of allies and proxy forces across the region, creating what is sometimes called the Axis of Resistance. The goal was to challenge American and Israeli influence and champion the Palestinian cause as a central pillar of its foreign policy. This strategy took root most firmly in the chaos of the Lebanese Civil War. In 1982, following Israel's invasion of Lebanon, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps helped organize and train a new Shia militant group, Hezbollah, the Party of God. From its base in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah would become Iran's most successful proxy and Israel's most formidable non-state adversary. Over the decades, this network expanded, with support flowing to groups in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories, fundamentally reshaping the strategic landscape. As this shadow war intensified, another, more alarming front opened. Reports began to surface about Iran's nuclear program. While Tehran has always insisted its intentions are peaceful, for energy production, Israel and much of the international community feared it was a clandestine effort to develop nuclear weapons. For Israel, an Iranian bomb was an existential threat that could not be tolerated. This triggered a new covert dimension to the conflict, a war fought not on battlefields, but in the shadows and in cyberspace. Assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists attributed by Iran to Israel began to occur. Sophisticated cyber attacks, like the Stuxnet worm that targeted and damaged Iranian centrifuges, represented a new era of digital warfare. Iran, in turn, has been accused of launching its own cyber attacks against Israeli infrastructure. From allies of convenience to sworn enemies, the journey of Iran and Israel mirrors the fracturing of the region itself. A Cold War fought through proxies, propaganda, and clandestine operations now defines their relationship, with the constant risk of escalating into a direct, devastating confrontation. For the people living in the shadow of this conflict, the consequences are deeply personal. In an Israeli kibbutz near the Gaza border, the day begins with a fragile quiet. Generations have built a life here, turning desert into farmland. But the tranquility is deceptive, punctuated by the periodic wail of sirens and the threat of rocket fire. Here, the conflict is not an abstract geopolitical game. It is the loss of friends and family members, the psychological toll of living under constant threat, and a deep-seated conviction that they are defending their home against forces, backed by Iran, that seek its destruction. The grief is a quiet, constant presence, a testament to the human cost of the long war. Miles away, in a crowded refugee camp in Gaza, another reality unfolds. Here, life is a daily struggle for survival amidst the rubble of past conflicts. For Palestinians, many of whom are descendants of those displaced in 1948, the blockade and repeated wars have created a state of permanent crisis. In this environment of desperation, the narrative of resistance, supported by Iran, finds fertile ground. Yet for most, the primary concern is not ideology, but providing for their families, educating their children, and holding on to dignity in the face of immense hardship. They are caught between Israeli military power and the rule of militant groups, their lives defined by forces far beyond their control. The resilience is extraordinary, but so is the weariness. In the end, hope endures. Beyond borders, beliefs, and bitter histories, our shared humanity can light a better path. May courage, empathy, and dialogue guide Iran, Israel, and us all toward peace. If this resonated, please subscribe to Deep Bible Chronicles, like, and share.